As much as 85% of the clothing hanging in an outlet store was never sold at full price anywhere. It wasn't returned. It wasn't last season's leftovers. It was manufactured for that rack, in that store, at that quality. And the crossed-out number on the tag is a price it never had. That number isn't a mistake. It's a product. Brands design it, print it, and sell it to you along with the shirt, and it costs them almost nothing to make. The outlet isn't where a brand dumps what it couldn't move. For most of the big ones, it's a separate production line with a separate margin. The discount you drove an hour to collect was decided in a spreadsheet before the fabric was cut. Do the arithmetic yourself. A jacket at the outlet says $189 with a line through it and $79 underneath. You walk out feeling $110 richer. But if that jacket was built from the beginning to sell at $79, and it was, then your discount is zero. You didn't save $110. You paid the full retail price of a garment that was engineered downward to hit that number. Now here's the part that should bother you more. The $79 jacket often carries a wider profit margin than the $200 jacket back at the mall. The store that's dressed up like a clearance bin is one of the healthiest lines in the business. Somebody is funding that margin, and it's the person who thinks they're the one getting away with something. The trap started honest. In the 1970s, in the mill towns of eastern Pennsylvania, garment factories opened little shops by the loading dock and sold what they couldn't ship. Seconds, irregulars, a sweater with a dropped stitch, a shirt dyed slightly off the run. Vanity Fair's outlet in Reading became famous enough that people drove in from 3 states, and Reading started calling itself the outlet capital of the world. Everything in those stores was real. It was real merchandise that had genuinely failed to make it into a real store, sold at a real loss by the people who had actually made it. Then the developers arrived, counted the cars in the parking lot, and asked the obvious question: what if you built a whole mall out of this? Here's what nobody planned for. Mistakes don't scale. A factory that runs well produces very few seconds, and the ones it does produce come in random sizes, random colors, random quantities. You cannot stock 300 stores on accidents. Once outlet centers spread across the country in the 1980s and 1990s, the channel needed a reliable flow of merchandise in full-size runs, arriving on a calendar. There's only one way to get that. You manufacture it on purpose. So the brands built second lines: J.Crew Factory, Gap Factory, Banana Republic Factory, Brooks Brothers 346, Saks Off 5th, Nordstrom Rack. Retail consultants who study the channel have estimated that as much as 85% of outlet inventory is now made for the outlet, and at some chains the share of genuine flagship overstock rounds down to almost nothing. So what exactly are you buying? You're buying a garment designed to a price. That's a real discipline with real techniques, and every one of them is invisible from 4 feet away. The fabric goes thinner, so the weight per square meter drops. The stitch count per inch drops, which is the single fastest way to make a seam cheaper, and the single fastest way to make it fail. Linings disappear. Horn and metal buttons become plastic. A branded zipper becomes an unbranded one. Patterns stop matching at the seams because matching plaid waste fabric. Interfacing gets glued instead of sewn. Consumer testing groups that have bought outlet and flagship versions of the same looking item have found exactly this pattern, again and again. And none of it is hidden technically. The brand tells you, in code, on the label, an extra word, a different logo, 3 small diamonds instead of 2. The channel isn't a charity ward for unsold stock, and the accounting says so. Rent per square foot at an outlet center runs a fraction of a flagship street location. The build-out is simpler, the fixtures are cheaper, the staffing is thinner, and the crucial one is markdown risk. A full-price store has to cut the price of a jacket twice before Christmas and pray, because whatever doesn't sell by January becomes a liability. An outlet item is already priced at what it was always going to sell for. There's no second markdown coming, because the markdown was printed on the tag the day it left the factory. Predictable volume, predictable margin, no end-of-season bloodbath. That's why brands kept opening outlets through the same decade they were closing flagship doors. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel takes apart the price of ordinary things until you can see who's actually paying. Subscribing is free, and it's the only thing that keeps these getting made. Do that now, because the next part is the mechanism itself. The most valuable object in an outlet store isn't the merchandise. It's the number with a line through it, and researchers have measured exactly how much work that line does inside your head. Your brain doesn't price things. It compares them. Show someone a jacket with no context and they have no idea what it's worth. Show them the same jacket with a higher number crossed out beside it, And suddenly, they can tell you precisely how good the deal is. That first number is the reference point. And here's the uncomfortable finding. It doesn't have to be true to work. It only has to be seen. It doesn't even have to be plausible. Retailers know this so well they built legal language around it. Watch for the phrase, compare at. Those two words are doing something very specific. They are not a claim about what this store ever charged. They're not a claim about anything at all. They're an invitation for you to do the comparing, so nobody else has to be responsible for the number. There are rules. The Federal Trade Commission's guides against deceptive pricing say a former price has to be bona fide, meaning the item was actually offered openly at that price for a reasonably substantial period of time, not just tagged that way for a weekend to build a discount. California goes further and says you can't advertise a former price unless it was the prevailing market price within the previous 3 months. Shoppers have sued. Michael Kors settled a class action over the value prices printed on its outlet tags for just under $5 million, without admitting wrongdoing. J.Crew, Gap, and Nordstrom all faced similar claims. In 2014, a group of U.S. senators formally asked the FTC to investigate outlet pricing. No rule ever came out of it. Retailers adjusted their wording. That was the change. Now look at where these places are built. Outlet centers sit out by the interstate, usually a good hour from the nearest flagship store. And the standard explanation is cannibalization. Keep the cheap version far enough away that it doesn't eat the expensive one. True, but the distance does a second job that nobody advertises. It makes you commit before you shop. You've burned a tank of gas on a Saturday. You picked up the coupon book at the information desk on the way in. Maybe you came on a tour bus with 40 other people and it leaves at 5. Nobody drives 70 miles to buy nothing. So the store doesn't have to sell you an item. The parking lot already did. By the time you're at the register with 3 things you didn't come for, the trip has closed the sale. In 2012, somebody tested all of this, by accident, on a national scale. JCPenney's new chief executive killed the coupons and the inflated list prices and moved the whole chain to honest everyday pricing. Same shirts, often the same final price you'd have paid with the coupon, just no theater. Customers abandoned the company. Revenue collapsed roughly 25% in a single year, something on the order of $4 billion, and he was gone by April 2013. His replacement brought back the crossed-out numbers within weeks, and the traffic came back with them. Same shirt, same $12, printed 2 different ways. One version sold, and the other one didn't. So price the thing properly. Over its life. A flagship coat at $200 that you wear 5 winters costs you $40 a winter. An outlet coat at $79 that pills, loses a button and goes shapeless by February costs you $79 for 1 season, plus the trip, plus the replacement. That's not a saving. That's a subscription. And there's a slower cost underneath it. Once millions of people learn a brand through its outlet version, the outlet version becomes what the brand feels like. The name stops meaning the garment and starts meaning the logo, and the expensive line quietly loses the reason it was expensive. You paid for a badge, and the badge got cheaper because you bought it. You can defend yourself in about 8 seconds, and it costs nothing. Turn the garment inside out and look at a seam. Count stitches, tug it gently, check whether the pattern lines up where 2 panels meet. Read the composition tag, not the price tag. Look at the brand mark for the extra word or the altered logo that marks it as a second line. Then ask the only question that matters and ask it out loud if you have to. Would I buy this at this price if there were no number crossed out beside it? If the answer is no, then you weren't shopping for the coat. And the store already knew that when it chose where to build the parking lot. There's another product where almost everything you're paying for happens outside the bottle. The liquid inside a $100 perfume can cost less than the cap. That's the last episode, The Real Cost of a Perfume. It's on screen now.